On a chilly Saturday in November 1990, a young kindergarten teacher named Sue Licia sat quietly crying on a nearly empty bench at a remote train station in Naha, a modest town nestled in northeastern China. Sue, 26, had just taken a life-altering step, leaving her husband and walking away from a marriage that had long been filled with strife and arguments. That morning, after a particularly explosive disagreement, Sue had reached her breaking point, packed a few belongings hastily, and left without a clear plan for the future. As she sat watching trains come and go, Sue felt a strange sense of isolation in the vacant station. Despite being a city with about 70,000 people, Naha was a quiet, understated place. Its skyline minimal, surrounded by farmlands stretching into the distance with rows of soy and corn. Its reputation was unremarkable, and few outside the region had ever heard of it. However, recent unsettling events had thrust Naha into the national spotlight. Young women from the area had been disappearing in alarming numbers, raising fears and fueling local anxieties. Sue was aware of these disappearances and even knew of a few missing women personally. But she never imagined herself as a target. She felt secure in her role as a teacher, distanced from the dangers affecting others, most of whom were reportedly involved in risky lines of work. Yet, on that bench with the eerie quiet pressing in, she began to feel vulnerable. Just then, a man appeared on the far end of the platform. Impeccably dressed, with a sophisticated coat and polished shoes, he seemed almost out of place in the sleepy station. He approached her, holding out a tissue with a sympathetic smile. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. His calm demeanor and respectful distance eased her initial wariness, and she accepted the tissue, grateful for the small gesture. He introduced himself as Jia Wang, a director at a nearby factory. With a compassionate tone, Jia listened as Sue, overwhelmed with emotion, shared her troubles. He offered her a fresh start, perhaps a position at his factory. Grateful for the kindness, she accepted his offer to discuss the opportunity further at his home. Although she hesitated initially, something about Jia felt trustworthy, and the thought of a new beginning was too tempting to resist. As they arrived at Jia's well-kept home, Sue's nervousness faded. Inside, they shared tea, and she felt comforted by Jia's genuine-seeming concern. But as she finished her tea, Jia's demeanor shifted. He fell silent, his expression changing to something darker and more intense. Moments later, Sue felt a heavy drowsiness overcome her, and before she could react, everything faded to black. Weeks later, nearby police officer Zhang was approached by an elderly couple concerned about a missing person. The missing woman wasn't Sue, though she, too, had disappeared in those intervening weeks without a single report filed. Sue Licia's husband simply assumed that his wife had left him after their final argument, not realizing she had actually disappeared without a trace. With no one else aware of her absence, Sue's vanishing went unreported. At this time, Officer Zhang, a diligent policeman in the town of Naha, was well acquainted with the rising number of missing persons in the area. By December, over 20 women, primarily those involved in intimacy work, had mysteriously disappeared from the train station where Sue had last been seen. The police in Naha, initially uncertain of the nature of these disappearances, had often speculated that these women might have simply left for other towns. Investigative efforts were minimal, with authorities not entirely convinced that the women were victims of foul play. However, when an elderly couple reported a missing man, an unusual case that didn't fit the previous profile, Officer Zhang's curiosity was piqued. The man had also disappeared from the same train station, echoing the circumstances of the missing women. Despite his usual procedure, Zhang couldn't shake the feeling that this case was different and that there might be a connection among all the disappearances. By January of 1991, with no sign of Sue and no progress on the other cases, the situation grew more alarming. More men and women went missing, bringing the total to 26 individuals, each last seen at the Naha train station. The authorities were now under increasing pressure to take action. With men who were not involved in intimacy work also vanishing, the previous assumptions about individuals relocating voluntarily no longer seemed plausible. Determined to uncover the truth, the Naha police assembled a task force in early spring, but they found no evidence, no leads, and no clues as to the whereabouts of the missing individuals. The city's mystery spread, with dark humor surfacing across the country. If you don't want to live, go to Naha. Months passed with no breakthroughs until the following October, when a police officer in a city 1,700 miles from Naha conducted random inspections at a busy train station. His attention was drawn to a remarkably well-dressed man with a striking appearance, who immediately acted suspiciously upon seeing the officer. As he hurriedly grabbed his bag and walked away, two other men near him mirrored his actions, raising further suspicion. The police quickly intercepted the trio, and upon searching their bags, discovered they contained drugs. Unfazed, the men remained silent, refusing to answer any questions. When asked for identification, the elegant man in the brown wool coat turned out to be none other than Jia Wang, the same man Su had encountered nearly a year prior. Although the officers were focused solely on the drug possession charge, they had unwittingly detained a key figure connected to the enigmatic disappearances in Naha. Unaware of Jia's suspected involvement in the missing persons cases, the authorities now had a potential lead, though they had yet to connect him to Su or any of the vanished individuals from Naha. The disturbing case continued to unravel as Jia and his two accomplices were taken to the police station, where officers immediately began intense interrogations. Jia remained silent, unflinching, but one of his associates began to break under pressure. Teary-eyed and visibly shaken, the accomplice eventually confessed, pointing the investigators toward Jia's house, hinting that the drugs were the least of their concerns. "If you think these drugs are bad," the accomplice muttered, "you need to see what's hidden in his basement." The following day, Officer Zhang received an urgent call from the investigators. The disturbing details of the confession gripped him, and he knew instantly that this was likely connected to the ongoing disappearances in Naha. He quickly assembled a team of 20 officers and 10 forensic experts to search Jia's house. Arriving at the well-kept home, the officers entered and were immediately hit by a nauseating stench that seemed to seep from below. Their search led them to a door leading down to a dark basement. The smell intensified, overpowering the officers, and some were forced to retreat, fearing they were inhaling toxic fumes. After donning gas masks, the team ventured back down, only to discover a hidden pit in the center of the basement. Simultaneously, another officer upstairs discovered a videotape. What they uncovered in that footage was horrifying. It showed Su, the kindergarten teacher who had vanished a year earlier, involved in an unalive orchestrated by Jia. Su's journey had begun when she accepted Jia's help at the train station, only to find herself drugged and imprisoned in the basement. She had woken to the macabre sight of bodies piled around her, believing her own fate was sealed. But Jia saw potential in her despair and offered her a twisted lifeline: freedom in exchange for helping him lure and unalive future victims. Terrified and desperate, Su agreed to his demands, and her first assignment was a businessman she lured from the same train station. As the footage revealed, Su had participated in Jia's dark ritual, under his coercive hold, piercing the unconscious man as Jia filmed every moment. Her actions became part of Jia's pattern, transforming her from victim to accomplice. Over time, she was joined by others, including Jia's ex-wife, all manipulated into carrying out his brutal acts. Strangely, despite having moments where they could have escaped, none of them sought help from the authorities. By October 1991, Jia's reign of terror had extended beyond Naha, with disappearances now occurring in nearby towns along the train line. The case finally broke when police intercepted Jia and his associates during a routine public safety check, uncovering not only drugs but a much darker, more sinister operation. Following their arrest, Jia and his accomplices were taken back to the station for questioning. During the interrogation, the accomplice who ultimately cracked under pressure was Su herself. Having remained hidden from the world, with no one realizing she was missing, Su was overcome by the officer's gentle encouragement, offering her warmth and understanding. She finally confessed, exposing the full horror of Jia's basement, a pit filled with the remains of 42 people, including 24 women and 18 men, victims of Jia's twisted control. In the end, Jia, along with Su and the other coerced accomplices, was sentenced to death. The executions took place on January 24, 1992, bringing closure to the grim chapter that has forever marked the city of Naha. The city, still infamous, is often referred to as Bandit City, a chilling reminder of the horrors that unfolded there. The haunting story of the Naha disappearances is a chilling reminder of how darkness can thrive in the shadows of trust and desperation. What began as isolated disappearances unraveled into one of the most horrifying crimes in modern Chinese history. A tale of manipulation, fear, and unthinkable cruelty. What would you have done in Sue's situation? Was she a victim, an accomplice, or both? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more unsettling tales that explore the depths of human nature and the mysteries that still haunt our world.